Now, you might have heard the story of how illegal immigrants were flown to suburban New York in the middle of the night. Many of you might have the question, who's funding this and which company is doing that? Well, that company is called MVM Inc., and they're doing that with your taxpayer dollars. Now, today we have a very special guest. We have a whistleblower employee who's going to be talking to us about how this same company is shipping migrant children throughout the U.S. So thank you so much for joining us today. Just to get started, for those of us in the audience who might not know what MVM Inc. is, can you explain to us what your company is and what they do?
It's a company that focuses on getting, they call it UCs, unaccompanied children, unaccompanied minors, getting them from point A to point B. And most of the time, point A is from a shelter all throughout Texas and all across the country. And point B is with a sponsor. Most of the time it's a family member, but lately the numbers are so crazy that it's no longer family members, it's family friends, people who are willing to take them in. And a lot of the times they don't even know each other. So my job is to show up, I get a blue folder that tells me where I'm going, who's my partner, and where we're gonna be picking kids up. And my job is to be with them on the airplanes, be with them on the buses. Sometimes it's buses, and sometimes it's charter planes. When it's charter planes, we move anywhere between 200 to 300 kids on one plane. It won't just be one plane, it will be 2, 3 planes at a time that leave. I do know that when we start off, we'll drop off in Texas. So we'll go from one plane in Texas to another. And then these same charter planes will go to New York, we'll go to California, we'll go to Washington, and then they'll finish off in Oregon or another state nearby. So it's not just one state, it's not just one drop off. You go to one destination, drop off the kids that are getting off there, and then you continue on.
So if you could give us an estimate, how many children per month do you think are being moved just in the Texas area?
Well, like I said, it's between all the offices, it's in the thousands. I say 8 to 10, but that's in 1 week. So in a month, I would say around 40,000, 30,000 kids.
So that's a lot of kids. Can you talk to us about the process from, again, pickup all the way to where you're dropping these kids off to? Can you kind of explain to us how that works?
So in the morning, we will meet in the parking lot around 5 in the morning, a little bit beforehand. By the time we have the kids, the buses, there are screens where we just pull them down and you can't see inside the bus. And normally the airports we go to, they're not big city airports, and normally it's dead and there's just us and there's no one else.
And you actually provided us with some documentation here. Can you explain to us what this paper is? When do you receive this documentation? What is this?
So that document, we receive it from those who are hired to house the kids. And that's their way of saying, hey, we released the kid to you guys. We passed it on to you guys, the kid on to you guys. Now it's your guys' job to pass this paper onto the sponsor. And this paper, what it is, it holds a form of social security number for the kids. It holds information regarding the child, where they're going to live. And this is also used as an ID to go to register into schools wherever they're going. A lot of times when we arrive to where it is they're going, the sponsor will say, hey, my sister was able to get a driver's license in LA. They were able to get a driver's license in New York City with this paper. Do you have it? And that's the paper that they're talking about.
And how are the kids being given these papers? I mean, when they come across the border, do they have identification? What's going on with that?
A lot of the times the kids will tell us that they threw their papers away because they stand a better chance of coming into the country without the papers. And it's different stories, but that's the one we hear the most right now. And that ID is whatever information they gave them at the border.
So when you land in these cities, you're meeting these sponsors that are there to pick up the children.
Correct. And when we get to these cities, we're told to wait for them in baggage claim.
Regarding the sponsors as well, like how are the children tied to these sponsors?
Yes, so the children give the name to to the people at the shelters, and the shelters will reach out to this person, and then they have their process that is very easy to, how can I say it? If, when they look into the person, if they see they're not related, they don't care. They'll prove it, and they send the kid off to this person. And the sponsor will tell us, oh, I'm not a family member, I'm not the kid's father, I'm not the kid's mother, I'm not blood related, it's just a friend. And it makes you wonder, like, what do you mean just a friend? Like, who are you? But we're not allowed to bring these things up. As long as it's the person on the paper, as long as it's the person who shows up and gives you the proper documentation, then we leave the child. So when we first started doing this, they were always family members, and a lot of the times now, kids will say it, or we find out ourselves that they're not related. Or in the beginning, we can easily tell that it was the family because they would cry, they would hug them. But now it's no more crying, no more hugging. It's just, hey, I'm here to pick you up, and that's it. They won't look at the kid. They will be upset that they have to show up to the airport. Sometimes we're like, hey, you're only 20, 30 minutes away. We're traveling with the kid all day, and we brought him far away for you. And they'll still say, hey, he's taking time out of my day that I have to come get him. And it's weird. It's very weird and sad and frustrating because you get to know the kid throughout the day and you want to be happy for him. But then when you get to where you're going and you're like, this is the person that they approved, like it's kind of upsetting. I'm guessing they're overwhelmed and they can't find family members. And if they can't find family members, they want to get these kids out of the shelter as soon as possible so that they will approve anybody that the kids say, hey, I want to go with him or I want to go with her. There was this one time in San Antonio where it looked like it was a lady in her 30s and she was accepting a boy that was 17, 16 years old. And then she was also accepting a boy that was not related to them, to other boy, but they still somehow had the same sponsor. And things run through your head and you're like, hey, if they're not related, how do they meet? And a lot of the times we hear, oh, through Facebook. I was talking to her through Facebook, through social media, and it's kind of creepy.
You said that you guys are so overwhelmed right now, overwhelmed to the point where MVM Inc. is mass hiring people and they're not being properly trained, which is leading to negligence when it comes to identifying these children and their sponsors properly. Can you talk to us about that?
It's one of the emails that I showed you. It's an email where they're pinpointing that, hey, you guys are accepting stuff that was IDs that were not approved. Guys are letting these kids go with people who are not on the list, who were not approved, and sometimes there are people who are not even on any documents for the child. And it tends to happen where these sponsors will show up and they will say, I'm here for the kid, but it's really the sister or a neighbor because the sponsor didn't feel like going. And these kids are being sent off with neighbors, with people who are nowhere near related to these kids. And it's just a mess right now. None of the rules that we're supposed to follow are being followed. And that's why that notice went out saying, hey, you guys need to pick it up and you guys need to accept the proper documentation. I want to say the biggest thing is what's going on right now is too many border crossings, too many kids. And these companies will take all this money from taxpayer money in the millions, but they won't do the hiring process the right way. A lot of people get hired and their background hasn't even come in yet. They'll get emails a month or 2 months into the job saying, hey, you need to do your background. And it's crazy because, it could be a child offender, it could be a bad person, and they have access to kids every day.
So just to recap here too, because I want to make sure I understand you correctly, because the border is so overwhelmed, because there's so many children, they're mass hiring these people on top of them not being properly trained and not vetting the sponsors that they're passing these children off to. The escorts as well, a part of this company, also aren't even being or getting background checks.
Correct. And there's no proper vetting right now saying, hey, these kids are really related to this person. No. It could be a child offender, a sex offender wanting to take one of these kids into their homes, and the government will let it happen.
And that's what I wanted to ask too. How does somebody become a sponsor for one of these children? How are these sponsors approved, like you said?
As long as the kid says, hey, this is my family member, they can lie and say it's my aunt or my uncle. They won't care. They'll prove it. Supposedly the rule is they have to fingerprint. The sponsor has to do fingerprints, and a lot of times they do, but we can tell in the packets that they give us when we pick up the kids, a lot of the times we can tell, hey, this person just got approved, and they're not even the relative, or they don't even know the child. We see things, and we do this often to the point where we can tell they don't know each other at all.
And why would you want to sponsor a migrant child? I mean, what are the benefits of sponsoring one of these children?
The kids will say, hey, they promised us $2,000 after 2 or 3 months of being with my sponsor, and I can't wait till they buy me this with that money. And the sponsors they know that the flights are paid for, they know that the money's coming in. They will mention these things, and it's very upsetting to us.
And who's paying them these thousands of dollars?
The federal contractors that are receiving taxpayer money.
And for MVM, again, you had shown me this article that they had previously signed a federal contract for $136 million back in 2021. So that money coming from, again, the taxpayers is going towards funding these children throughout the U.S.
Correct. Flights, food, I want to say it ranges from $2,000 to $5,000 to pay for a trip of two co-workers and 2 kids. But a lot of the times these groups are 5 kids, 3 co-workers, and it's multiple offices.
Democratic Mayor Eric Adams of New York is upset because he's saying Republican governors, specifically Greg Abbott in Texas, are busing migrants to New York. Is it the Republican governors that are to blame for these buses of migrants, or is it, companies like yours that are flying all of these migrants to New York?
No, it's us. It's us. We've been doing it for since Biden came into the administration, a little bit before that. And it's picked up way a lot when Biden came into office. And we tend to come to these places when it's less packed. We have arrival times of 11 p.m. at night, 1 in the morning. Sometimes we get flown to a city nearby where there's a smaller airport, and then we drive into the city. That way no one sees us. We'll drive in a bus, a charter bus, in vans, and we try to avoid the public. But we do this, I want to say, between all the offices in Texas. They're all over the country, but in Texas is where it's most busy. We move anywhere between 2,000 and 5,000 kids a week. There's charter flights out of El Paso, and then there's smaller groups between 30 to 40 workers who will take anywhere between 100 to 200 kids. And this is in El Paso, Pecos, Texas, and McAllen, Texas.
And again, this is all being funded federally via taxpayer dollars.
It is funded by the government, but we take orders from ORR, the Office of Refugee Resettlement, and they're the ones who let the kids come into the country, go with the families. There's 2 contracts. So there's an ICE contract with our company, and there's an ORR contract. ICE contract is for deportations, but there's not a lot of deportations going on right now, so the most busiest work is with ORR, Health and Human Services, HHS.
And is that why you originally got into this? Because you thought that you were going to be helping kids out and, helping them achieve a better life?
Correct. And at first, it was going great. But ever since the Biden administration, as time's gone by, it's a mess. There's no way of explaining what's going on here except that it's a big mess. There's no way of knowing where to start and make it better because we're not getting any help.
How do you know that these kids coming across the border are actually kids?
There's no way of knowing. A lot of the times they got more facial hair than I do. They got tattoos. And the kids will say, hey, that kid threatened me in there, but he also mentioned that he's not the age that he says he is. And the kids talk amongst themselves and they know who to stay away from.
Well, thank you so much for your time today. This has been such an eye-opening interview and again, just an insight into what's really going on behind the scenes regarding where taxpayer dollars are going to, regarding where these children are going to, how they're being improperly given to random adults throughout the United States. Thank you for being brave enough to speak out regarding what's happening.